Let me give you a little bit of background. Greg, how do you pronounce your last name? Is it Garcia?
It's Geraci, David. Geraci.
Geraci. I only studied one foreign language in school, and that was English.
This is Sicilian.
Greg is a recognized thought leader in the field of product management and the CEO. And how do you pronounce your company's name? Actuation?
That's right.
Consulting, which he claims is the world's leading product management consulting and training organization, but we're going to arm wrestle over that. It's a global provider of product management, consulting, training, and advisory services to many of the world's best known organizations. He is the author of two global bestsellers, Take Charge Product Management and The Guide to Product Management and Marketing Body of Knowledge, which he was the chief editor and writer of for AIPMM, the Association of International Product Managers and Product Marketing. He's also a former board member of the Business Architecture Guild, where he contributed to the most recent version of the BizBach Guide. As an industry expert, Greg has also been asked to contribute his product management expertise to a growing list of professional bodies of knowledge, including the Institute of Electrical Engineers, the first IT Bach, and the latest BayBach Guide. And you can learn more about Greg at www.actuationconsulting.com. Rich, who will be also our other co-presenter, has 30 years of experience championing and delighting customers. He believes that strong product and engineering collaboration is essential to achieving that goal. In addition to collaborating on the study of product team performance, Ron co-authored the Addison Wesley book, Managing the Unmanageable: Rules, Tools, and Insights for Managing Software People and Teams. It's now in its second edition. Learn more about that at www.managingtheunmanageable.net. Ron spent 7 years as a programmer, 2 years as a product manager, 25 years managing product and development organizations at all levels, from VP of engineering, product, and CTO at companies ranging in size, from tiny startups to Charles Schwab, Fujitsu, Stanford, and Apple. He's now an engineering management fire jumper. And Ron, we have about 367 forest fires here. So can you get out of Seattle and come down here and help us out? And he's focused on transforming chaos to clarity in software development. He advises executive leaders how to untangle the knots of their product development organizations, trains execs and teams in Agile, and coaches development teams and leaders to make software development hum. You can learn more about Ron at www.ronleachy.com. He's long been a popular speaker at product development and Agile meetings and conferences, and his email address is ron@ronleachy.com. I'm happy to be your host. I am in Silicon Valley and I have a little over 50 years of product management or more senior experience. Recently, a couple years ago, I released this book called Building and Scaling Great Products. See if I can do my Vanna White impersonation here. And then recently, Organizing and Managing and Scaling Great Products. And then co-hosting this webinar is Wiley NXT, and they published this little pamphlet that I wrote called Successful Product Design and Management Toolkit, which is being used by IIML, a prestigious management institute, which is starting a 7-week executive course on product management. Deborah, would you like to say a few words about that?
Sure, and just to let you know, David and Greg and Ron, I think a number of students, the program is starting on 22nd of August, but I think a few students from that batch is joining the webinar today. So it's basically a program which focuses on building product managers for the future, who can leverage, design thinking, data-centric approaches to understand what David talks about, what customers do much better, and then they are able to build their product strategies and business strategies focused on an deep understanding of what is it that customers are willing to do. So I think a lot of top industry experts, including David, and the faculty from IIM Lucknow, which is one of the top business schools in India. All of them have come together to build this program. And we believe that by the end of the program, people would be able to kind of have a very good understanding of what is it that would make products successful, and I'm sure would be going ahead and launching a lot of successful products and businesses together. So that's about it.
Yeah, all of my
Very-
books are available on Amazon worldwide, so you can just look up those titles or anything more about the books and the courses that I have at www.spicecatalyst.com. Okay, Greg, over to you.
Great. Thanks so much, David. First of all, it's great to be here today. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share this year's findings. Ron and I are going to be co-presenting, so we'll be passing back and forth, sort of the speaking microphone, if you will. And let me begin first by just pretty much skimming through, since David did such a great job in sort of introducing me, what I had for an intro slide, so I'm going to bypass that. Ron, is there anything you'd like to say before I move on to the content about your own intro?
No, I think David handled that as well.
Okay, so right into the meat of the presentation then. So today's presentation covers three main areas. The first is about the respondents. So who responds to our almost annual survey of product teams globally? So a little bit of demographics, if you will. So we know who it is that's been responding to the surveys. Second, gets into performance. So what respondents tell us about their product team's performance, how product managers and product management is doing within their organizations, and also innovation. So three subsections within the performance section. And then finally, we'll go through some regression analysis, and I'll talk more about that in a second. I find it's always helpful to give a little bit of background about the survey that forms the basis for the annual white paper that we produce. So let me just give you a short snippet about how the survey is put together. So what we do is we work closely with sponsors and promotional partners who then email a web-based survey out to a wide range of participants. The survey is anonymous, although there is optional disclosure. So for example, if somebody wants to be the first to receive the white paper once it's produced, if they provide us their information, we make sure to get it out to folks before we make it widely available. Also, we're interested in hearing from a wide variety of different roles. The key really is, since we've been conducting the survey since 2012, we really strive to hear directly from those who are actively involved in product development activities within their organizations. And I've listed some of the roles, such as business analysts, development managers, product managers, etc., here, so that you can see them, but the list is quite extensive. The key really is anybody at any level who's actively involved in product development activities within their organization. And then one of the things that makes us a little bit different is we take an extra step. Once we have the survey data collected, what we do is we provide it to an independent statistician who conducts regression analysis on it. And we've been doing this consistently since the inception of the study back in 2012. So now that we've sort of gone through a little bit of the survey, let's talk a little bit about who responded. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Ron. Ron, take it away.
Okay, so as in prior years, the vast majority of respondents do play an active role creating or enhancing products and services. And so this year it was 97%, which is very comparable to the prior years. As Greg said, this is our sixth survey or sixth study. What's different this year is that we had a much higher concentration of product managers and owners than we normally do. Just over 54% were product professionals this year. Greg? So when we asked who our respondents reported to, we got a pretty even spread across all the categories. So we had a good distribution across all the segments, from reporting to managers, reporting to directors, reporting to VPs, and reporting to company officers. In all, about 77% of respondents report to a company officer, a VP, or a director, so fairly senior. Next. As in the past, over half of our respondents come from the technology segment. And I should note that technology includes not just software, but also hardware. In fact, over 51% of respondents came from the technology sector, and the remaining 49% are spread across all of the other segments. So 18% said they're part of services, 12% consumer products, about 5% in education, about 2% in government, and then about 12% in categories that are other than the choices we gave them. Next. So there's a good spread across all the segments of company size. The concentration is in businesses between 50 million and $2 billion, where about 45%, nearly half of our respondents are in that size company. Next. So let's take a closer look at what product team members told us about their organization's performance. So if you can move on, Greg. So the majority of respondents indicate that their teams are intentionally stable over the long term. Now, my own mantra has become over time that software development is a team sport. And team sport performance is gated on trust and respect and psychological safety. And those characteristics are built over time on stable teams. So it's a little distressing that only 40% of team members are on intentionally stable teams. And while only 15% of teams indicate they're intentionally fluid, in fact, 60% end up being on fluid teams. While we recognize that not all organizations have the staffing to utilize or maintain stable teams over time, as consultants focused on making product development home, we observe significant benefits to product teams staying stable. From performance to maintaining momentum to accumulating product knowledge over time, stable teams have real value. Next slide. So nonetheless, 71% of product teams reported more team cohesion than not. But surprising, and so not surprisingly, given our previous slide, 29% of respondents tell us they have low levels of trust, communication, and collaboration. That's a pretty significant number of organizations, so there's a lot of room for improvement on product teams. Next slide. So effectiveness of your product team. So this data is critical to our correlations of practices to performance, and here are the performance stats. Less than a third of teams say they deliver value consistently. These are the teams that are the high performance teams that when we found correlations with high performance teams, it was this third of teams that self-reported that they were on higher performance teams. The majority say that they deliver value but lack consistency, and approximately 18% confess that they perform poorly. And these are, and again, we found some correlations of practices with poorly performing teams, which are these teams. Next slide. So when it comes to how product teams use their time, there's really significant room for improvement. Just 36% of product team members spend the majority of their time achieving company business goals. Sadly, 64% of product team members are unable to spend sufficient time focused on company objectives. Sad state of affairs. Next slide, Greg. So let's look at how organizations develop products. So as you can see by this graph, teams claiming to be agile exceed those recognizing that they're blending agile with waterfall by 49% to 39%. We've been tracking product development methodology adoption since 2012, so let's take a longitudinal look at the data on the next slide. If you look at the bar on the left, that's 2012. So we've got the 6 studies, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, and then jumping to the 1920 study, 2019 to 2020 study. If you look at the bar on the left, you'll see that Agile Scrum, the yellow on that bar, was just 12.8% in 2012. By 2016, it was nearly 50%, basically what it is today. Agile Scrum predominates today. Now notice the waterfall, the pink bar above yellow. Waterfall has continued to decrease from 18% back in 2012 to less than 9% today. So it's experienced a steady decline to half of its previous numbers. And then finally, blended methodologies, the purple at the bottom, have slowly shrunk from more than 50% to stabilize at roughly 40% as Agile adoption has grown and Waterfall has shrunk. So moving on to the next slide. We looked at which methodology is associated with increasing the profitability of your product. And as in prior years, Agile is the method that respondents consistently associate with increased product profitability. In fact, when we looked at the teams that were using the various methodologies, in fact, more than not every group, regardless of what they were using, said if we were using Agile and or we were using Scrum, it would make us more profitable. If you compare this year's findings to 2016's responses, when we last asked the question, the response rate is quite consistent at 52.1%, then now 52.7%. This is not a surprise. Agile's backlog focuses on ensuring that we deliver the highest value every single sprint. The shift from hundreds of pages of barely read requirements to backlog grooming that's focused on the highest value results in dramatically reduced waste. Teams together defining done results in both higher quality and avoiding costly revisiting of code. Agile directly correlates profit to Agile's focus on customer delight. So all of those, for all of those and many more reasons, it's clear that Agile provides higher profitability, and it's widely recognized across product teams and product team members. Greg?
All right, so thank you, Ron. So let's transition over and take a closer look at what we learned about product management in this year's study. So first of all, we asked, where do product managers come from? And for those of you who aspire to be product managers, there's really good news. Product management is an equal opportunity profession. In fact, 33% of product managers enter the field from an engineering role, which gives you an inside leg, as it's the largest section, as you can see, purple on the chart. In fact, only 10% of respondents say they started as product managers. Some of the other gateways into product management: marketing, 11% of respondents indicated, operations at 10%, sales and customer service at 9% respectively. So they all provided gateways to become a product manager, and other makes up the difference. As you can see, others a pretty significant section, and it includes people such as those from finance who find their way into product management as well. I think the bottom line here basically is that product management truly is an equal opportunity profession, although statistically speaking, if you're an engineer, you have the best opportunity to enter the field. And I think, Ron, you being an engineer, you probably have something to say about that. Any comment?
Yeah, so I'll make a personal note regarding that. So I spent 7 years as a programmer. It was a little more than 7 years as a programmer. I was a really good programmer. I have several patents that I was awarded. I wrote a couple of books on programming, a couple of popular books on programming. This is a number of years ago, and made the transition then to management and the transition to product management from engineering. I managed, Apple Computer recruited me to create and manage a product management group for development tools at Apple, and so that transition for me was an interesting one, that I went fleeing back to engineering after a year and a half of doing product management. But I've gone back and forth several times actually in my career doing product management. My heart is on the engineering side, but you can see that transition between engineering and product management is a fluid one. Greg, if you can give us the next slide, I want to talk about commonly utilized requirements criteria. We looked at how is it that backlogs, how is it that requirements are prioritized, and these days when we're looking at Agile, the question is, how are backlogs prioritized? Because backlogs are backlogs of requirements. And what we found was that size and influence of customer are the #1 factor in prioritizing requirements. And it suggests that too often companies are having trouble distinguishing between whether they're in the products business or whether they're in the services business. And this is not insignificant given that product companies are valued, have a value 6 times the valuation of services companies that earn the same revenue. So you want to be really careful if you think you're in the products business to focus on product management and building a product roadmap that is good for all customers, not for that big customer, the sizey customer, the influential customer. I want to point out 2. So actually, let me walk down these. So the second one we saw was risk. This is a good thing from everyone who's spent any time in project management knows that paying down risk early is a smart move. Risk first development has always been critical to success in product development and product delivery. Then third was development cost, the cost of development alone as a factor. And I'm going to call that out because I'm going to come back to that. So pay attention to that. Development cost was third at almost 55%. Then key internal stakeholder influence, which like size and influence of customer is not necessarily a very good way to be making decisions about product order and about feature order. Then technical issues, architecture and stability and scalability, which certainly need to be considered, but only then do we see revenue and profitability. And I want to note, look at profitability. The last of those qualifications is profit, and we're going to come back to this. So next, if you want to, and then 12% said, "Oh, we just put a finger up in the wind and try to figure it out on the fly." Greg?
Hey, thanks, Ron. So the third slide in this act really deals with roadmap transparency. So as you can see, this year's slide is roughly about the same as the last time that we asked the question back in 2016. One of the benefits of having started the study back in 2012 is we get a good longitudinal look, like Ron showed you earlier, on methodology adoption rates. So once again, we asked this question back in 2016, and when you compare the two, there's been very little difference, very little change between what we were told back then and what respondents said this year. Really, the only change of note is that there are fewer responses in the 3-month time frame than there were in the original time we asked it back in 2016. We also asked a question about product line reviews this year, and what we basically learned by doing that was that roughly 75% of respondents basically say that they regularly or occasionally conduct product line reviews. We view this as a good thing from a consulting standpoint. All right, that concludes the product management subsection. So let's shift over to innovation. This year we asked a series of 5 questions that were in part submitted to us by one of our sponsors because we hadn't delved into the innovation section in great detail in past studies. So in looking at innovation this year, when asked about how actively involved product managers are in the innovation process, we were heartened to see that 65% of respondents indicated that product managers are actively involved in innovation activities early in the process, and we view this as great news. When it comes down to innovation maturity, or rather innovation immaturity, respondents tell us that most organizations, 61%, have immature innovation processes. Generally, innovation maturity is lacking, as only 16% of organizations indicate that their innovation processes are either optimized or well managed. So there's plenty of room for opportunity here. As it relates to innovation program management, when we take a closer look at how companies are managing their innovation programs, we can see that only about a quarter of companies have automated their innovation processes. In fact, over 3/4 of respondents indicate that their organizations are either using manual spreadsheets or SharePoint or some other similar management tool for their innovation program. So once again, another area of opportunity for many organizations. When asked who's involved with innovation processes within their organizations, the vast majority, as you can see, rely upon employees and customers to spark their innovation processes. Few organizations rely upon suppliers, partners, startups, universities, and researchers, or the public at large. As you can see, it tails off rather radically. In terms of desired outcomes, there was a pretty good representation of different goals that organizations have with their innovation programs. We're going to focus on the top 4 that had the highest percentages. The first was to gain or maintain competitive advantage. Almost 70% of organizations expressed this as a goal. The next was new product or service development at 67%. The third was improving customer satisfaction. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later, 63%. And the fourth had to do with continuous improvement. And as you can see, there's a general step down from that point on. All right, so on to our key findings. There are 5 that came up in this year's regression analysis. So just a brief drum roll. First has to do with business strategy. The second has to do with the use of customer satisfaction as a metric. The third has to do with how product managers spend their time. The fourth has to do with profitability. This goes back to what Ron was pointing out earlier around the use as a requirements criterion. And the fifth has to do with focusing upon the entire backlog. So let's dive into it. So in this year's regression analysis, our regression analysis shows that a product team's ability to connect their daily activities to the company's overarching business strategy is highly correlated with financial success. That's what the regression analysis shows. However, as you can see on the slide, only 27% of survey respondents this year indicated that their product team is able to connect their daily activities directly to the company's business strategy. In fact, most respondents indicate that their organizations either fail to effectively communicate this company strategy to the product teams, or indicate that the company is lacking a company strategy, a business strategy overall. And when looked at from a longitudinal perspective, since we've been doing this since the last 7 years, the story is even more discouraging. The amount of product teams that could connect their daily activities to the company strategy has actually decreased over 10 percentage points over time. So companies that want to improve the performance of their product teams and their financial performance should really shore up communication and transparency regarding the overarching company business strategy and how product teams are connected to it. I believe sincerely that doing so will help product teams make better short and long-term decisions, and it leads to a clear understanding of the strategic priorities and how product team members' actions can positively or negatively influence the outcomes. This is also likely to increase product team members' commitment to their work efforts. I think everybody's experience being on a product team is something that you're not, you can't understand what the benefit of it is to the organization, and that can be very discouraging. Talented team members often dislike working on projects that don't appear to add value to their organization. So, having better connectivity to the overarching business strategy at the product team level has been shown in the regression analysis to be statistically significant. So let's shift to the second regression analysis factor, and that has to do with the use of customer satisfaction as a metric. In our view, product teams should be held accountable to their performance. However, when we first asked this question about what metrics product teams are being held accountable to, there was a wide range of responses, but not a single metric that organizations consistently held product teams accountable to, and that was back in 2015. This year, when we did our regression analysis, it showed that customer satisfaction is now the dominant metric that most product teams are being held accountable to. In fact, 51% of organizations are now using this accountability metric. Other metrics, as you can see, that are being used include quality, velocity, or throughput metrics, profitability, top-line revenue. Interesting, a lot of folks respond that our product team is not being held accountable, but does have objectives to support either revenue, margin, expenses, or EBITDA, and so on. I think the best news in looking at this and all of this is that product teams that are held accountable to customer satisfaction are highly correlated with improved performance. Additionally, this trend using customer satisfaction as the accountability metric for product teams has risen 10% since 2015. So this is a positive development on all fronts, and once again, highly correlated with improved performance. We also asked a question about how product managers spend their time, and it'll be interesting to hear David's comments about this a little bit later, I'll bet. We found in our regression analysis that how product managers spend their time matters, and that companies that encourage their product managers to spend more than 30% of their time in the field were highly correlated with higher levels of success. But as you can see here, unfortunately, only a minority of organizations, 11%, appear to enable their product managers to spend this much time in the field, for example, with customers or prospects or at trade shows. And Ron and I believe there's a variety of reasons for this. The first thing that I see from a consulting standpoint is there can be a lack of executive support that inhibits product managers from getting out and spending this much time. If you think about it, it's pretty expensive to have your product managers actively engaged outside the organization at this level, and it requires strong support from the leadership team. A lot of times, people lay this at the feet of the CEOs, not investing enough in their product management organizations, but I think it's safer to say that it's not the CEO that's the only force that needs to maybe invest more time and energy in how product managers spend their time, but the head of sales and finance and other executive team leaders also need to be vested, with that level of commitment in the organization and see a commensurate response, commensurate return. Also, product managers often acknowledge their own shortcomings if you speak to them frankly. They talk about their own shortcomings in time management and proactive behavior and their own biases, for instance, leaning towards strategic activities as opposed to tactical ones that may also be part of their role. But I think regardless of the source of the current limitations on how product managers spend their time, organizations need to step back and rethink about how they utilize their product managers and work to optimize external engagement. Our regression analysis shows that product managers who spend 30% or more of their time engaged externally leads to improved performance for both the product team and the organization. So with that, I'm going to swing it over to Ron. Ron, you're up.
Yeah, so I want to add to that previous slide, if you can go back for just a second.
Sure.
And add a little bit of commentary on it. From a product team standpoint, product teams really count on their product owners and product managers to bring the customer into the room. And I train organizations and I train executives in Agile, and one of the roles, and I talk to product owners about all of the different roles that they play. One of those is managing stakeholders. And aside from time management of their own time, which I think it is a big issue, that the cost of managing stakeholders can be really high in many organizations, and that from a time standpoint that can be really high. But the cost then is to the organization. The cost is to performance, as Greg just mentioned. There's a direct correlation between spending more than 30% of your time with customers and having a high performance team. And that cost of stakeholders pulling down all of product owners' time and product managers' time so that they're not spending that amount of time with customers is a cost to the whole organization. It's a cost to the product. It's a cost to profitability. And it's a cost to their credibility with the team of being able to bring the customer into the room. So I think it's really beholden on all of you who are product managers and product owners to figure out how to fend off all of those other distractions and get out there and spend time with customers. All right, now get off my soapbox and move on to the next that next slide. So I said we would come back to looking at requirements prioritization. So our latest regression analysis shows that emphasizing profitability as the primary criteria in the requirements prioritization process that positively impacts performance. There's a direct correlation between profitability and high performance teams. Unfortunately, only 39% of organizations actually use profitability as a requirements criteria. Now, we saw earlier the leading requirements criteria are size of customer, followed by risk, followed by development cost, followed by internal stakeholder influence, followed by technical considerations, followed by revenue, and then only seventh do we get down to profitability, coming in last among the seven prioritization metrics that we offered our respondents as choices. It's also worth noting that while development cost is a component of profitability, the reliance on development cost by itself as a requirements criteria, we found negatively correlated with high performance. That those teams that did use development cost as a criterion for ordering their backlogs correlated with lower performance teams. So development cost is a component of profitability. What we want to focus on is that profitability, not the development cost itself. Dramatically more organizations need to embrace profitability as a metric if they want to improve their product team's performance. Next slide, Greg. So it turns out that product teams that size the entire backlog demonstrate higher levels of performance. I think there's an arrow there if you click the next slide, Greg. And yeah, there we go. The data shows that only 17% of respondents both have more than a quarter's backlog and size all the stories in it. Sadly, 18% struggle with backlogs that are only an iteration or two of stories deep. 50% have deep backlogs but struggle with predictability by sizing only the next sprint stories, and 16% do no sizing at all. So let me come back to the conclusion. The 17% that have a backlog that's 3 months or longer and size their whole backlog, which gives them a much higher level of predictability, which I can personally attest to, correlate with higher performance teams, which is sort of obvious given that predictability then generates the ability of the whole organization to figure out when it is that they're going to do stuff, when it is they need to do stuff, and what it is they're going to have when they get there. All right, next slide. So we want to take you back to some results from earlier studies to what we learned then about 3 critical practices, and the first of these is stand-ups. What we learned about stand-ups in 2015 is that holding effective stand-ups correlates with performance. Those teams not holding effective stand-ups correlated with the least productive teams. And we found that productivity then correlated linearly with the frequency of effective stand-ups. Stand-ups matter, and effective stand-ups held daily matter most. All right, next slide. And in 2016, we asked about definitions of done. So as with stand-ups, we found that teams without definitions of done correlated with the lowest performance teams. But just having a definition of done did not move a team into the high performance category. It turns out it matters who created that definition of done. Definitions of done that were handed to teams from someone outside the team had just average performance. Those teams were members of the team of that actual team. Those teams had definitions of done they'd written themselves correlated with the highest performance teams. And finally, the third of those, if we go to the next slide, was about onboarding. In one of our earliest studies, we asked about onboarding new team members and found that not only does effective onboarding correlate with the highest performance teams, but only 4% of organizations characterize their onboarding as a best practice. Talk about low-hanging fruit. So next slide, and I'll hand it over to you, Greg.
Okay, thanks, Ron. All right, so Ron wrapped up the regression analysis 4 and 5 with a little bit of bonus coverage from our previous studies. If any of you are interested in downloading this year's white paper, you can download a free copy at www.actuationconsulting.com. There are other places to get it as well. For example, if you're a PDMA member, you can download it at their Knowledge Center. And if you utilize Planbox, they actually have it on their website as well. Speaking of Planbox, they were our sponsor, so I just want to acknowledge their support this year. Also, you'll notice below that we had a bunch of distribution partners who helped with us in terms of testing out the surveys and distributing them, as well as also, helping push out findings. So special thanks to the PDMA, Software and Information Industry Association, Silicon Valley Code Camp, and the Chicago Product Management Association. For those of you who are interested in who else other than Ron and myself are involved with the work, Steve Stark is a principal at my organization, and Matt Jackson is a president of Jackson Consulting, focused on operational turnarounds and operations overall. And for anybody who might have a question that pops up after this webinar is over, feel free to reach out to me directly if I can be of any help or support. All right, with that, I just want to take a second and thank David and Soumya for the opportunity to present today. And with that, David, I'll turn it back over to you guys.
Let's take some questions. If you got any question, please put it in the group chat session, and we'll stay long enough to answer everybody's question. The first one is from Prashant, who wants to know if product manager and business managers are the same. Do product managers own the profit and loss for the product?
Ron, I'll take that one. So from a previous study, we know that only 18% of product managers actually have P&L responsibility. We haven't asked the question for 2 or 3 years, so that may have changed. But that was from one of our past studies, that was one of the learnings. David can attest, there's such a wide array of titles that people use to describe the role of a product manager. I can't say that I believe that business manager and product manager are necessarily the same thing, but they may be used by some organizations to represent some or all of the functions of a product manager. David, do you want to add anything to that? You might have a perspective on this.
Yeah, there are over 400 titles used for product managers worldwide, and they all pretty much do the same thing. So typically, product managers do not have P&L responsibility because as the profession developed from Procter & Gamble back in 1932 to its present day incarnation, from brand manager to product manager, back then as a brand manager at Procter & Gamble, a brand manager had P&L responsibility. They were essentially a general manager for the product, and they also had budgetary control over advertising and market research, which has been lost. I advocate that product managers should ask for that authority to be commensurate with their responsibility. A business manager would be the overall business, which might be multiple products or multiple product lines. The next question is, are there any matrices which show a relationship between clarity and company vision and product management effectiveness?
Ron, I don't think we have any matrices that show that. Do you recall any from your perspective?
I don't. Did we look at it? Yeah, I'm not recalling it. No.
Yeah, I think the short answer is no. We don't have any material that would show a direct correlation or connection in terms of some type of matrices that we could share.
I have a comment on that.
Yeah.
A few years ago, when I was doing research for my books, I looked for a correlation between a company's values and company's long-term success and whether or not the company had a vision for itself and its long-term success. Stryker Medical, Apple, Amazon have very clear company visions. And that's part of the reason for Apple being worth over $2 trillion these days. Other organizations don't have any vision. And when you combine a company's values with the vision, that defines the company's culture. Recently, if we go back, the train companies, the railroads, years ago, defined themselves in terms of their company vision as being in the train business, not in the transportation of people and goods business. I predict that if they did have that vision, that the railroads would also have been building cars and built roads and trucks and so forth. Another example of lack of clarity between a company vision and long-term company success is Eastman Kodak, which back in the 80s was one of the largest, most profitable companies in the world. And they were the ones that invented digital photography in 1973. But the sales force was concerned about losing their commission checks. And their company vision was dividing the company into three groups. One for home and professional photography, still. Another one was for motion pictures or moving photography. And they later, in the late 1990s, they licensed some technology for digital video from a company I was consulting with at the time called Lexar Media. And then about a year later, they canceled the licensing of those patents again because they were concerned about cannibalizing their film business. If they had a vision of being in the business of helping capture images, store images, retrieve images, and present images, they could probably be one of the biggest companies in the world. They would have invented YouTube and Netflix and the whole digital photography area. We probably might be talking to each other on a Kodak phone because their brand at the time was quality. So those are a couple of examples of if you don't have a good company vision, the chances for long-term success is quite small. Equally, you have to have a set of company values. And I did a study of the first 500 companies in the Fortune 500 list, and about 300 of them are out of business these days. And because I was familiar with many of those companies working on science and technology back in those days, I knew whether or not they had any values, and if they had values, did they follow them? And the result was the 300 of them did not, and they had a culture of failure, and those companies are no longer around.
Yeah, I think, David, just to add on to that, going back to the gentleman's question, while we don't have a matrices, what we do know is that there are plenty of organizations that don't have a coherent business strategy, and there are those that actually have it but don't effectively communicate it well. So, having it is one thing, but making sure that everybody understands it and that you can effectively execute it is another as well. So,
and it's really,
very good point.
Hard
a recent example of that is Volkswagen, which has a very good company vision and a very good set of values, but they decided to hide their diesel engine emission performance, and it cost that company billions and billions of dollars of not having that incongruence.
Yeah.
Ron, do you have a comment?
I think, David, I think Ron wanted to make a comment. Ron?
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think it's really hard for product management to align product goals, to align product vision, and to align product roadmap if there's nothing to align it with. And so that was one of the things we found in terms of company strategy and the visibility and transparency of company strategy, the importance of that for product managers and for product teams to be able to align with that and find success.
Back to you, David.
Great. The next question is, what's the optimal backlog that needs to be defined ahead of time? The company that Anuj works for defines the next quarter's backlog ahead of time. Is it optimal?
Yeah, so I want to say a couple of things about that. One is having at least a quarter's backlog is optimal, and our studies showed that. And sizing that much of a backlog correlates with the highest performance teams. not to say that that backlog is stable over that quarter, but that there is that much backlog, and that sizing then provides the provides the product managers understanding of cost, so that they can order on the basis of ROI, they can order on the basis of bang for the buck. They can ensure that they don't have teleportation at the top of their backlog, which is my favorite feature, by the way. But it turns out that it's very costly to build teleportation. I've so far haven't found an engineer who's willing to quote me a time on it. And so we certainly want to make sure that we're delivering the most value to our customers and the most delight to our customers. And so the backlog simply needs to be, we need that much in it, and then we need it every time we walk into a planning meeting, which for most teams is every 2 weeks. We need that backlog currently ordered by whatever it is that's going to deliver the most value to our customers. And so a 3+ month backlog that is repeatedly iteratively ordered every planning cycle is critical.
Great. Can you please share the slides after the meeting?
Sure. If they reach out to me directly, I'll be happy to provide them with a copy of the deck.
But I should
Oh,
note
are
that
you
the
asking
study
for it,
itself,
David, or was it somebody in the chat room? David, was that you asking for it or somebody in the chat room?
No, that was me reading the question from Sakura.
Okay.
yeah. So I want to note that the study itself has way more detail and is. I urge you to go get the study and read the study instead of the slides.
I have to second that, but if they reach out to me directly, I'll work it out with them.
Okay. Next question is transitioning from engineer/business analyst to product manager. From your experience, what should be the primary focus areas?
Ron, that sounds like your question. I came from sales and marketing.
Yeah. So the one, you have to let go. You have to let go of not let go of everything you know about engineering, but not walk into believing that you understand how long things are going to take. And this is a problem for us who are managers as well. We were engineers. We think we know how long things are going to take, and we really need that team autonomy and that self-organizing teamness. We need to go to our teams and get input from our teams on how long things are going to take. And so that's one of the I think gotchas of transitioning from engineering to either management or product management. The second thing really is that ability to form a coherent picture and vision for product that is, and Greg and David, I may throw this part of it back to you. You know, I think it's really critical for product managers to have a coherent picture, coherent vision, and a coherent roadmap for the product. And you know, and one of the falsehoods about Agile is, oh, we're Agile, we don't need a product roadmap. Just because we have a roadmap doesn't mean we're going to follow it, but just because we're Agile doesn't mean we don't need a product roadmap to give us that North Star to march toward. That at every given moment is really critical to us to on the team side to know where we're going and know where we're marching, and that ability to build that is really important. Greg or David, do you want to say something about that part?
Yeah, I mean, I can add on to your comments. I mean, once again, I didn't come from engineering. I came from a different space on the continuum, both sales and marketing. But one of the challenges I would suspect for somebody moving from an engineering role into a product manager role would be the level of customer engagement that's required, as well as the sales involvement with the sales team and the senior executives. Those might be areas that somebody who's been in an engineering role might not have had to live in, and the shades of gray that, you know, that come along with that. So Ron, you can probably comment more whether, my perspective looking at this from the outside, not as an engineer, but I would suspect those might be challenges that an engineer might face stepping into the role. Also, I think there's probably time lag differential. I think you were sort of getting at this yourself, which is when you step into a product role, you're thinking 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, a year, 3 years, right? Not one sprint, one epic, one backlog basically. So there might be some time dilution that you might experience as an engineer stepping into a product manager role as well. Comments?
Yeah, so two actually. One is I'm going to go back to that comment I made earlier about managing stakeholders. And one of the characteristics that you need as a product manager is the ability to manage stakeholders. You are going to have sales coming to you, you're going to have marketing coming to you, you're going to have, if you're in a startup, you're going to have the company founder coming to you. Company founders ideate at a rate that's an order of magnitude faster than development can develop. And every idea is the best idea, the most important idea, the one we got to work on now. It's incredibly interruptive to teams. You've got to protect your team, allow them to focus during the course of a 1 week or 2 week or 3 week sprint, however long your sprints are, and allow them to go heads down and not be interrupted and not interrupt their sprints. You've got to fend off. You've got to be the Maxwell smart cone of silence around your team, protecting them from a torrent of distractions. And you've got to deal with all those distractions because all of them are coming in. And so one of the mantras that I encourage product managers to learn is this mantra of, what a great idea. Let me put that on my backlog. And if then, you get the pushback of, well, where are you going to put it on your backlog? Marching them up to your backlog and actually saying, so let's figure out where this goes. And oh, by the way, if you think it goes at the top, there are some other stakeholders you're going to have to negotiate with around this. And being that negotiator and that facilitation of negotiation is critical. And the second one is, and I think you walk in from engineering, you walk into product management and don't realize this, that and we saw it on the prioritization schedule. The number one thing that product managers are using to prioritize their backlogs is loud customers. And that is, generally speaking, the wrong thing to use. Profitability is the right thing to use, and loud customers can be a real danger to companies because they will drive you into being in the services business instead of being in the product business, and services business are a sixth evaluation of product companies.
I've got two things that I think should be the primary focus in doing the transition. One is to understand that engineers work in the world of solutions. Product managers work in the world of identifying the problems that the customer has so that the engineers can innovate and put together the solution. The second is the product manager needs to be able to do what I call the product market strategy. That is the strategy for the product to the market that they're targeting. And there are 32 things that I talk about in my Wiley book that the product manager needs to have in their product market strategy. And it ranges from understanding what the customer wants to do to a very clear value proposition, to a clear understanding of the personas of who you're selling this product to and who's using this product, to understanding the competition, understanding the market, being able to position the product in the marketplace, then understand the target markets, the total available market, how are you going to penetrate the market, your pricing strategy that maps into that. This all, of course, follows the product vision that you defined early on, and then setting up the distribution, trading channels, and so forth, along with the overall business model. That is how you're going to make money with the product. Unfortunately, a lot of companies do not do the product market strategy, and that's one of the reasons why about 35 to 50% of all new products, representing about $500 billion to $1 trillion, is wasted each year in new product development. Next question says, in one of the slides, profitability is kept as separate from customer satisfaction while defining product requirements. Aren't they correlated?
Ron, that sounds like for you.
Our profitability and, so what were those two things?
Oop.
Oh, profitability and customer satisfaction. So not necessarily. Profitability is about numbers. Profitability is about dollars. Customer satisfaction. So if we don't satisfy customers and if we don't delight customers, we're probably not going to stay in business. But we've also got to have the numbers around pricing, and this is another area that product managers get into, is that around pricing and around profitability of the product, around cost of the product, and there's a whole science around figuring out profitability that is quite separate from delighting customers. I wanted to, David moved right on to this question from the last one, and I wanted to note that the things he was listing, the things that Greg were listing, and some of the things that I were listing are together a reason for those of us in engineering to when we've got great product managers, to have an incredible appreciation for our product management partners. Those are product management is a hard job, and it's a very different job from engineering.
David, I've known Ron for about 10 years. It's the first time he's ever given us that prop.
I'll tell you a little story of one of my clients was VP of engineering at a company, and he had previously been VP of product management, or had been a product manager at Hewlett Packard, which was one of the ground zero for product management training. And he told me that he needed to have a strong product management team. Otherwise, he as an engineering manager could not be successful. That product management team needed to tell him clearly what is the problems that the product needs to solve. Without that, he cannot be successful. Next question is, thank you, Ron, Greg, and David. To what degree do high-performing product teams simply respond to customer vision goals, or to company vision and goals, versus helping define and guide vision and goals?
Could you restate that, David? I'm not sure I caught that one.
Says, to what degree do high-performing product teams simply respond to the company's vision and goals versus helping actually define and guide the vision and goals?
You know, I think, oh, go on ahead. Ron, you going to take it?
Yeah, so I'm going to start and then pass it off to you. I think it's, I walk into, as a consultant, I walk into companies too often in which company goals, company vision, and company values are not there, or they're not there, or they're not communicated, one or the other. And I think product teams are left flailing when they don't understand where it is their company's going. The company goals are set by company executive teams. Now, is there upward flow from product teams of understanding of customers? Yes, absolutely. But I believe that companies at the executive level need to be making those decisions and those choices, and providing clarity that then product teams can align with.
I'll take it a step further. I'm an advocate for inclusiveness. So, you know, I know it's not feasible to have, let's say, a mid-sized company have all your product managers be involved in developing the company's business strategy, but there needs to be appropriate representation so that, you know, because the more that people are actively involved in formulating the strategy or the direction, the more likely they are to actually execute it. So, you know, I think inclusion in the development of company strategy, either by product management, you know, and other parties in the organization, or some kind of proxy, CPO, you know, VP of product management, SVP, whatever. There needs to be appropriate voice at the table to ensure that not only what gets created upstream is actionable, but that people buy into it and support it and its execution downstream.
Well, hopefully we've got a chief product officer who's part of the executive team who's funneling that knowledge to and within and embracing it at the executive team level. And not all organizations do. So I agree with you 100%.
I can give you a personal example from my experience at Apple. I had just taken over the Apple III product line as the group Apple III product manager. And at that time, Lisa had not yet been released, and nor has the Macintosh. So the two profit lines was the Apple II and my product line, the Apple III. The executive committee went off to Pahara Dunes, a retreat center near Silicon Valley, and canceled my product line and didn't bother to talk to me about it. A couple of weeks later, John Scully called me into his office and said, "What should we do about this?" And I said, "Well, you never asked me about this before you canceled the product line, and it's your fault that you've got $20 million in piece parts spread around the world between our manufacturing facilities." Scully said, "What should we do about it?" And I said, "Give me the authority commensurate with the responsibility." And so I made a presentation to the executive committee of a business plan I and about 80 other people put together for the entire product line. And I was asked at the end, after I showed a comparison of the company's values versus the different things we could do with the product line, the executive committee realized that the abrupt cancellation of the product line was not showing any empathy for our customers, which is one of Apple's values. And it was also bad management, and one of Apple's values is good management. So they asked me to take over an independent business unit solely devoted to the Apple III. And they gave me 17 people, a budget of $4 million, and said, "Go do something." And we sold 25,000 Apple IIIs. It became the third most selling computer in the world at the time, and produced enough revenue and profits for Steve Jobs to finance the Macintosh development. So in that case, I took charge and defined what needed to be done, and I helped change the company's vision and goals. And I have found many product managers in a similar state. So I put together a presentation, which is up on my website at spicecanalist.com, which is entitled Quit Whining and Ask for the Authority. And you can download that PowerPoint presentation, fill it out, and then go to your manager and ask for the authority to manage your product line, in addition to the responsibility that you already have. The next question is, what's the difference between product manager versus product owner versus technical product manager? Ron?
Yay.
So I'll take a piece of that. So I'm not sure what a technical product manager is, but I'll take the product manager and product owner one. I think technical product manager falls into the how many names do we have for product managers, David? 30, did you say? 300?
400.
400. Yeah, 400. I think that falls into the 400 category. But I will say that product management is to give you one example, pragmatic marketing has a placemat. It's the size of a placemat. It's got a whole bunch of bubbles on it, but the bubbles all describe different activities, different roles that product managers take, different qualifications that product managers need. And I've never met a product manager who fills all those bubbles. I've never met a product manager who can do all of those things. It is a really, really broad set of things. Product owner, if you start looking at those bubbles on that chart, there are about 6 or 8 of them that fill in what a product owner does. So I think there are product managers who are focused on teams and being the carrier of the product vision into the team, which is what a product owner is, in my view. They are the product manager that each team needs, the one and only one product manager that a team can go to ask for, what does this mean? What should we do now? What is the next thing? Whereas there are also product managers who focus on competitive analysis. There are also product managers who focus on understanding every single customer persona and building personas, understanding every persona. There's a really broad range of things that product managers can do. Product owner is just one of those.
All right, so I'll take the next handoff. David, did you have something you wanted to say before I dive in?
I define the product owner as the liaison between the product manager and the Scrum. They're the ones responsible for bringing the stories that needs to be developed to the engineering team. Very difficult for a product manager to also be a product owner, and impossible to do those two jobs and also be the Scrum Master, which should be a third person. A product manager works strategically. A product owner works tactically. And it's very difficult for a person used to working in tactics to transition to strategic thinking. A technical product manager, I think that was a term that Pragmatic Marketing defined a few years ago. And it's more along the lines of a product manager that's also technically trained and sometimes slides into the role of a product architect or a system architect, which is also a dangerous thing for a product manager to try to do, because again, the product manager needs to live in the world of the problem, while the product architect or the technical product manager is also living in the world of the solution, and it's hard to go from one to the other.
Yeah, so just to add on to your comments, I think our worlds generally align, the three of us. I see the role of product management spanning everything from the inception of an idea, which we saw earlier in the innovation slides, all the way through the retirement of a product and having accountability and responsibility for that. Whereas I view a product owner as a subset of those responsibilities, focused, as you were saying, David, more geared towards the engineering and development aspects of the team, and less so the downstream management and ultimate retirement of the product. Well, but they sort of sit in the middle of the broader span of product management responsibilities. And hopefully in those organizations that are fortunate enough to have both a product manager and a product owner as part of the same team, which is great and ideal in many ways, there's good collaboration and division of labor, between those two teams.
Some companies have called their product managers product owners, which is wrong. They should cut that out because it creates a great deal of confusion.
Yep.
Next question is, after transition from engineering to product management, what should be the primary focus in the first 30 days?
Ron, this one seems
start out on
towards
that.
you.
Yeah,
No,
I think
yeah, go ahead, David.
the number one thing they should do is get to know personally every member of the engineering and the product team. If you can take them out to lunch, do so, and then ask them one key vital question. What do you want to do when you grow up? And I ask all the people that work for me or that I work with that question, because I'll understand what motivates them, such that when I go into product meetings with those members, I know what is motivating them in terms of what they're wanting to do. And then I can offer up compromises when there is disagreements that fit into the things that they aspire to. So what I would say in the first 30 days is go meet everybody and understand who they are, what their values are, where they're coming from, where they want to go, so that you can help them be successful, and so that you can forge compromises and relationships in order to have a successful product.
I'm going to add on to yours. Hey, Ron, let me add on, and you can follow up on me if that's okay. So I agree with David. The job has a lot to do with relationships, to build trust and to be able to effectively collaborate. And it all comes down to people and the relationships you're able to establish. One of the other things I would say is what the individual in their question didn't say is whether there's somebody in that role today or whether they're stepping in it for the first time and nobody's in it. And I think the set of activities that you would do would be slightly different based upon that decision tree. For instance, if there is a product manager in that role today and you are replacing them, I would spend quite a bit of time trying to understand from that person, what activities, what materials, where the process is, who he or she sees as the primary people that they need to interface with. Not all parties are created equally. There might be a handful of people, 5 people that, you know, determine the success or failure of the product internally, and understanding who those people are and prioritizing the development of those relationships, not just every relationship, you know, I think is important. You know, if there's nobody in the role, then you even have more work to do, in my opinion. It's not just the people, but you have, you know, you should really try to understand what's needed to keep the existing momentum of whatever that team is that you're inheriting going forward. So, you know, I think we're pretty much in alignment on this. I would just add that I think there's a fork in the road depending upon, you know, where on that decision tree is there a product manager currently, is there not? And then I would also say that I agree with David that the relationship side is the most important, because if you don't have that level of trust, you're going to have problems. But I would not treat all the parties the same, because they're not going to all have the same influence on your ability to affect, you know, positive change with your product. So I think you need to think strategically about, you know, who are the most important people that you must have on side to be successful. And one of the realities of being a product manager is you can't keep everybody happy. There's far too many interests in competing priorities, and you've got to be able to live with that. And so, you know, knowing who you need to please and, you know, making sure you've developed those relationships effectively is really important. Ron?
So I'm going to echo the word relationship that both of you have used. Absolutely, product management is a relationship job. If you look at who product managers need to relate to, David was calling out the team. Greg, you were calling out who's most important on the team, but also some of the stakeholders. I think you've got a team, you've got stakeholders, and you've got customers, and you've got executives. And you need to build, and first 30 days, you need to build relationships with all 4 of those. You need to understand who your key stakeholders are, and who you've got to keep happy, and who you've got to balance off against each other, and where those issues are. You need to start spending that 30% of your time with customers in month 1. It is understanding customers is what your team. You won't get credibility with your team if you don't do that. And then there's the executive side, which is where the funding comes from, where David went to get the authority to go with this responsibility. Boy, that's a rare thing. The watchword when I was at Apple in product management was all the responsibility, none of the authority. And boy, being able to latch onto authority is an amazing thing when you can do it. And so maybe you can, but for most of us walking into product management, we don't get it, and so it's all relationships, because there's no authority there. You succeed based on credibility and based on relationships.
I could add 2 additional things. One is in those first 30 days, understand what the vision is of the product. When I took over as the Apple III Group product manager, the previous Apple III Group product manager had left the company, and the one before that was a fellow by the name of Steve Jobs. And he wanted to kill the product line because he felt it was occupying a portion of the marketplace that his yet to ship Macintosh was going to go into. He also, by the way, wanted to kill off the Apple II. And if he'd done that, it would have killed the company before he was able to ship his beloved Mac. But Steve learned a lot after he got fired from Apple, and after his next computer became his last computer, and then later came back to Apple and was, as everybody knows, very successful. So I went and talked to the chief architect for the Apple III, a fellow by the name of Jeff Raskin, J-E-F Raskin. And Jeff, by the way, was also the chief architect for the Macintosh in its early days. And he told me who the product was being targeted towards and why he added the feature sets in there. And that I was then able to use in terms of positioning the product properly in the marketplace and direct everything from then on out. The other thing to do is go talk to your best customers, not necessarily your largest, but your best customers. I became the second product manager for a desktop video editing system called Video Effects. And the company had raised about $40 million, targeting, they thought, video production by Macintosh users. I went out and talked to 20 of our best customers, and none of them were Macintosh users. Most of them didn't even know where the on switch was. All of them had 4-year degrees in video production. And the value proposition is that this little video effects product could cut the cost of a post-production suite from $150,000 to about $75,000. So the company completely missed the positioning in the marketplace and the target markets. And that's why instead of selling to the tune of thousands per month, they were selling about 10 per month. So the 3 things is get to know your team. And as Ron pointed out, get to know support, get to know service, get to know sales, get to know marketing, get to know finance, and also get to know your best customers and make sure you clearly understand what the vision is of the product. And then if you have any time left over, if there's some technology involved in your product, go to Wikipedia and read about it, and you'll probably know more about the technology after reading it than the engineering team. Or at least you can sound like you know something about it, and you won't be embarrassed.
And if you have any time left over, get some sleep for your second month.
Last question. Isn't a product owner a role for a product team which has adopted a Scrum methodology, which is primarily a development method? Product managers do a lot more than just development work.
So product managers don't do any development work.
Right. They're responsible for the product market strategy. And the pragmatic framework.
Product owners don't do any development work either.
Correct. I think, Ron, you mentioned pragmatic marketing's framework, which last time I looked at it did not take into account such things as agile. I analyzed all of those frameworks and put together my own. And that framework, the Spice Catalyst Product Lifecycle Management Framework, takes into account agile and takes into account certain things that need to be done before other things in the entire development of the product market strategy and the marketing strategy. And that's available for free as a download on my website. So I think that's our last question.
Yeah, so I'm going to add a little bit more to that. So product owners have are as I claim are a subset of product management, and they need to decide what set of things for their development team are going to delight customers the most, and make sure that by ordering their backlog, make sure that those things are at the top of the backlog, so that those are the things that when the team goes to plan its next sprint, they're working on. They're working on delighting customers.
Great. I think that's our last question. Just thank everybody for attending. We had a little over 50 people that I noticed on the Zoom call. And have everybody have a good afternoon and good rest of the week.
Thanks, David.
Great. Thank you, David.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, David. Thank you, Ron and Greg.
Thank you very much yourself. I really appreciated the opportunity. It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, same here. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Okay, you as well.
Thanks.